Good works. If our profession of faith does not eventuate in good works, we should evaluate the validity of our salvation experience. Here's Gene to explain this principle.
And here, James is rather subtle about this, but now once again he gets specific and deals with an issue that he had dealt with earlier. What good is it, my brothers, if someone says he has faith but does not have works? Can his faith save him? If a brother or sister is without clothes, he's dealt with that issue, and lacks daily food, he's dealt with that issue, and one of you says to them, go in peace, keep warm, eat well, but you don't give them what the body needs. What good is it? Now see, that ties back to what he said in chapter 1, verse 27. Pure and undefiled religion before our God and Father is this, to look after orphans and widows in their distress. These are true needs. This is not taking advantage. These are true needs. And what he's saying is, you do not show the works that should accomplish your faith. Therefore, I'm raising the question, do you have a faith that is really faith? And he ends this chapter by saying, or this section, for just as the body without the spirit is dead, so also faith without works is dead. It's a dead faith. See, that problem back in Jerusalem with the Grecian widows. And they should have understood that problem if they were there. We read in those days, as the number of the disciples were multiplying, there arose a complaint by the Hellenistic Jews. These were Hellenistic Jews that James is writing to. The one spread throughout the Roman Empire. And the conflict was against the Hebraic Jews, those who lived in the vicinity of Jerusalem. Their widows were being overlooked in the daily distribution. And the 12 summoned the whole company of the disciples, and they said to them, it would not be right for us to give up preaching about God to wait on tables. But then they went on to say, but it's important, we need to care for them. Because you see what happened? When these widows who had traveled to Jerusalem along with others, when they ran out of money, they were without anything. See, there was plenty of money in the coffers in Jerusalem to take care of the poor. But once you became a believer, you were cut off. There was no welfare system at all. And that was true throughout the Roman Empire. They didn't have a welfare system in the Roman Empire as Christians, and they didn't have it within Judaism, and these people were in need. And so he's dealing with a very specific issue here in relationship to good works. And the illustration relates to the way they were treating the poor. And earlier, he had alluded to that right at the end of chapter 1, and particularly with the widows and the orphans. It was a very specific issue that these people were not addressing in this particular cultural situation. So the principle was they were neglecting those who had a real need. Now, it was a cultural variation from our situation, but the principle is still true. If our profession of faith is not followed by good works, we should evaluate the validity of our salvation experience. Now, this doesn't mean we're saved by works. You see, Paul addressed that. We're saved by grace through faith. This not from yourselves. It's God's gift, not from works. And James was really teaching the same thing, but what he was saying was, we're his creation, created in Christ Jesus for good works. That's the proof of our faith. God prepared ahead of time these good works so that we should what? Walk in them. And later, he says we are to what? Walk worthy of the calling that we received in Jesus Christ. So in a very subtle and yet specific way, he was saying, are you guys really saved? Those of you who could care less, particularly the rich, he's dealing with that issue and how they were treating the poor. Now, there's an important balance here. In view of the Corinthians' slow response to reflect the fruit of the Spirit, why must we be cautious and balanced in teaching this principle? Well, Look at 1 Corinthians 3, 1-3. Brothers, I was not able to speak to you as spiritual people, Paul wrote to them, but as people of the flesh. But they were believers. They were babies in Christ. I fed you milk, not solid food. You were not yet able to receive it. In fact, you're still not ready, he said, because you're still fleshly. He's talking to believers. Just like James was talking to believers. But they were still fleshly. For since there's envy, strife among you, are you not fleshly? And aren't you living like ordinary people? Who's the ordinary people? Unbelievers. So the question that I've raised here is, let's be careful that we don't judge one another. James subtly says, are you really sure you're believers? Because faith without works is dead. But what the Corinthian letter demonstrates is it takes some people a while to get there. And they may be believers, but they're not living it. And it takes time. So we've got to be very careful that we don't say, faith without works is dead. You don't even know Jesus. The fact of the matter is, they may know Jesus, but they're not progressing in their faith. What James is saying, eventually, if you really know Jesus, your life is going to change. And if it doesn't change over the long haul, then we need to raise that question. We need to check our lives. And that's the principle. If our profession of faith is not followed by good works, at least eventually, we should evaluate the validity of our salvation experience. And I think that's a very important question that we need to look at.